I am nervous. Sincerely, I am nervous because in Job chapter 38, please turn there with me. In Job chapter 38, God Himself speaks. And it is not a small thing for a sinful man to dare to speak and have the audacity to say what God would say. Now, there are some who carelessly throw around what God says. It ain't Aaron Tucker, though. I can tell you this. It is a great fear of mine that I will stand before the Lord and not be found to be saying what He has said. And it's my fervent prayer today that when the Lord speaks in Job chapter 38 and beyond, that I would only say what He says. Keep in mind as we understand that the Lord is about to speak out of a whirlwind. Job chapter 38, the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind, a tornado of volume and fierce, powerful activity. Before the Lord had something to say, Job had some things to say. And we've spent first 2 Sundays of September talking about what happened to Job, talking about some of the things Job's friends said, talking about some of the things that Job said. And I want to highlight for us that the things that Job said, the things that Job's friends said, and by extension, what you have to say, what you believe, and what you hear spoken by people, and what you see typed on the internet, or what you hear said on television, that when there are people daring to speak what is right, what is wrong, what's true, what's false, when those things are spoken out there, there are severe limits to what we know. We think we know much that we think we know, we actually don't know as well as we know. And much that we think we know, we're actually wrong about. We go to God's Word, and when we hear God speak, then we know that what He says is what's always right. And there are limits to what we know as humans. Human knowledge is grand, and we know a lot, and there's a lot we can do, and the creativity and the scientific minds and the philosophies and the poetry and all of the beautiful things that come out of the human mind for generation after generation after generation. There are things to be celebrated in that. God has made us in His image, and when we create or think or do, there's beauty in that, absolutely, but there are limits. There are places where we can't get to in our intelligence. There's stuff we can never know. There are things we will never understand. I don't mean just that we could study it and then understand it. I mean, there are things no person will ever know. There are limits. There are limits on all of us. And I would just like for the Lord to speak for Himself here as He does in Job chapter 38. Remember what all Job has gone through. In Job's chapter 1 and 2, Satan comes before the Lord and says, Job's not as good as you think he is, and I can prove it to you if you'll let me have at him. And the Lord says, I'll let you have at him, but you've got some limits on what you can do. I'll let you do this, but not this. I'll let you go this far, but not this far. And God allows Satan to take everything from Job. Everything he's ever owned, all of the wealth that he possesses, gone in one day. And when messenger 1 announces a loss, messenger 2, messenger 3, messenger 4 comes in and says, and all 10 of your children have died. It's a funeral, and there's a time where we need to put 10 caskets in a row and say goodbye. Job has lost everything. Then Satan comes back, and God allows Satan to strike Job's own body with pain. Painful, difficult sores. Everything, every square inch of his skin and all of his nerve endings are raw. His skin feels like it's on fire. He's in more pain than almost certainly any of us have ever experienced. And he calls out, and he doesn't understand what's happening here. And his friends think they understand what's happening, and it turns out they don't know. They think they know, they don't know. We've talked about those things. But in Job chapter 13, verse 22, Job says, look, then call and I will answer, or let me speak and you reply to me. So Job looks up at heaven, says to God, we need to have a conversation about this. He says in Job chapter 19, verse 7, Job says, I cry out violence, I am not answered. I call out for help, but there is no justice. So Job, in life-changing pain, does not understand. He does not understand. And he calls out to God for an answer. Now God will speak here in Job 38 and beyond. But can I just give you a spoiler alert? Job's question is actually not answered. Why? The answer to why is never given. There are times where we sit with our brothers and sisters in pain, we watch their tears, our heart breaks, and we wish we had an answer for why. And there are times where in a funeral home you are walking up and sharing your condolences with somebody you care about, and they are in an intense mode of grief, and we want to have something to say. And so we will often say things. Sometimes they were things that were said to us. Sometimes they are just things that come to us in that moment, and we're so unsure of what to say, but we feel like we need to say something. There are limits to what we know, and if we dare to say why God did or why God did not, we should be careful because it's possible we are not speaking the truth. The prophet Isaiah reminds us in Isaiah 55 that God says this, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Now, I don't know if you've ever traveled to space, but that's a long way, okay? And the fact that it is such a great distance illustrates for us that our thoughts, as grandiose as we think they are in fact small thoughts compared to a God of infinity. A God of power you can't comprehend. A God of knowledge you haven't thought to know. His ways are way different than ours, and we are tempted to put God in a box into which we can understand Him. If we could just make Him understandable, what we've actually, though, done in a moment like that is created an idol. An idol. There was a reason we were commanded not to make a statue and worship that. Because you can't create God. We are created by God, and we can't create anything that accurately represents all that God is. So we can't create a thing and worship the thing. We're to create somebody who is more than who we are and thinks past our level of thinking, and we're to worship Him. But worshiping Him does not mean putting Him in a box. There's not a box big enough. It hasn't been made. Job will make a progression in Job 19, verse 7. Again, I cry out violence, I get no answer. I call for help, there's no justice. Later, Job, at the end of the story, Job chapter 40, verses 4 and 5, Job will say this, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you, God? I lay my hands on my mouth. I've spoken once, I will not answer. Twice, but I will proceed no further. Job goes from shaking his fist and asking why and demanding an answer to a cowed and humble head that is bowed before something too big for him. What causes Job to go from one extreme to the other? God speaks. Job chapter 38. Beginning in verse 1, the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Out of the whirlwind. Don't ever imagine that the words that God has to say don't have power. God answers out of a tornado, out of a hurricane. Hurricane force winds and tornado activity take houses, buildings, structures, flip them upside down, flip them inside out. They take great mighty trees and rip them up by their roots. They wash everything clean, scouring everything that we've made until it's nothing but dust left. That's the force of just a hurricane or a tornado. And then out of this whirlwind, God speaks. And he says to Job, who is this? In other words, who are you? Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? You're taking the light, the blinding, fierce brightness of my truth, my advice, my counsel, and you're darkening it, putting a shadow on it, hiding it, and you're doing these things not even knowing what you're doing. Who are you? Who are you? Who do you think you are? Now, this sounds almost harsh and angry from God. And we think about Job's pain and sorrow. But remember that all that God is in his terrible majesty actually can comfort us in our time of suffering. And we'll see that at the end of this story as well. But Job speaks up, and God says, who do you think you are? And Job 38, verse 3, God says to Job, dress for action like a man, I will question you, and you make it known to me. This is a beautiful thing that's often misunderstood. Gird up your loins. Okay. Very simply, God's saying, roll up your sleeves there, big boy. Let's have a conversation. God's saying, take your belt buckle, notch it up one more tightly, and then let's talk. Lace up your boots a little bit there, buddy. Let's have a conversation. You want to talk? Let's talk. But you better prepare yourself for the force that's coming to you. And to gird up your loins in a man who's wearing a robe means to take and grab this and turn it and come upward with it this way. Take the front portion, go around the leg. You need to take a robe that you cannot step very far in, that you cannot run in, and you need to convert it into battle mode. For you to be able to go into battle means you have to do some things here so that your legs are prepared to run, so that your body is prepared to take action. And God says, you want to talk? We'll talk, but you better straighten your hat up a little bit and look at me while we have this conversation. And Job is not prepared for all that God's about to say. Now, he'll speak again about himself in Job 38, verse 4. But before God says that, can I remind you what God already said from Genesis chapter 1? God says this in Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form, it was void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. There was nothingness, and in the beginning, God created something from the Latin ex nihilo. In other words, out of nothing. God made something out of nothing. Now, you've never dared do such a thing. You've made some really nice stuff, but you've always had supplies provided to you or that you purchased, and you could use those things to make some things. God made dirt and then made a planet with it. God made air and then created the universe. God made light. What did he do? He goes on to say in Genesis chapter 1, God said, let there be light. God said. God just spoke some words, and there went from nothingness and darkness to all of the blinding rays of light. See, light, it doesn't just include the things that you can see. Light includes an entire electromagnetic spectrum. It contains some forces and energies, and light pervades the entire universe. And God said, let there be light. God just said, he just said it. Y'all, he just said it. That's what he did. And power came. God also said, let there be an expanse. Let it separate under from above. In other words, he created the sky or the ozone layer or the atmosphere. He circled this rock he's making with something that's a blanket to it, and there's an expanse. So we're separated from space, and we have what we have here, but there's an expanse in between us there. It's the sky. God said, "Let there be," and there was. And God also would go on to say this: "Let the dry land appear." So there's water around this planet, and he separates water, and he pushes up mountain, and there's this land mass larger than you can travel without any length of time, and he says, "Let it appear," and it shoves itself up out of the water in obedience to its master. That's Genesis, God just getting started with speaking. And that God says in Job 38, verse 4, "Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined the measurements of this planet? Surely you know. Who stretched a line upon it? On what were its bases sunk or its foundations there? Who laid the cornerstone of this thing? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Who shut in the sea with its doors when it burst from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment, thick darkness I made its swaddling band. And I prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors on this sea. And I said, thus far shall you come, and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stayed." Job, where were you when I did all that? When I not just constructed a house, when I constructed a planet, when I gave it a magnetic core and created gravity, where were you? When I put land masses there, when I provided water for it, when I shone a sun on it, when I surrounded it in there, when I decided that that's where the shoreline was going to be, and I decided that's what the shape of the water was going to be, when I did all of those things in the beginning, Job, where were you then at that moment in time? God goes on to say in Job 38, verse 12, "Have you, Job, commanded the morning since your days began? Have you caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it?" Have you done that? "Is it changed like clay under the seal? Its features stand out like a garment from the wicked. Their light is withheld. Their uplifted arm is broken. Did you command the morning?" He says in verse 16, "Job, have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep?" Job, have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Job, declare if you know all this. Job is well on his way to closing his mouth and bowing his head. God continues to speak. Job chapter 38, verse 19. "Where is the way to the dwelling of light? Where is the place of darkness, that you may take it to its territory, that you may discern the paths to its home?" You know, Job, yeah, you were born then. And the number of your days is great. Oh yeah. Sarcasm dripping from the lips of God as he puts Job in his rightful place. Do you know where I take light to go take a nap? Do you know where I put darkness until it's time for it to come out? Do you know where all that lives? Do you know where death stays? Have you walked into the Mariana Trench and the ocean? Do you even know all the things I've done? Look at verse 22. "Have you entered into the storehouses of the snow? Have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I've reserved for the times of trouble, for the day of battle and war? What is the way to the place where the light is distributed, where the east wind is scattered upon the earth?" Job, where's the shed where I keep rain? Job, where's the pasture where I pen up the wind until it's time? Job, where is the closet that I put the hailstones at until I'm ready for them? Where is that? Can you get there? Do you know where it is? God goes on to say in verse 25, who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain? In other words, who dug a ditch for the rivers to start running when rain gets there? Who cleft a way for the thunderbolt? Showed it where it was going to go. To bring rain upon a land where no man is, on the desert in which there is no man, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, to make the ground sprout with grass. Job, there are places on this planet where no man has laid eyes, and I make it rain there or not, as I see fit. Verse 28. Has the rain a father who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb did the ice come forth? And who has given birth to the frost of heaven? The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Job, who's the father and mother of all of this that's been done? Who, Job? Who? You know the answer, don't you? You and I both know. In the middle of all of these thoughts, the answer is only God. His name is Jehovah. In English, we say it that way. In ancient Hebrew, they say Yahweh. That just literally means I am. He just is. And everything else that isn't because He is. Everything you've ever known exists because He decided it would. That's who He is. The great scientist Pascal says, instead of complaining that God had hidden Himself, you should give Him thanks for having revealed so much of Himself. Poet Robert Browning says, if you get simple beauty and not else, you get about the best thing God invents. Beauty. Simple beauty. Mr. Joseph Mary Plunkett said, I see His blood upon the rose, and in the stars, the glory of His eyes. Ancient Greek poet says, the power that holds the sky's majesty wins our worship. What do you know? What do you think that you know? Where is the limit of, I don't know anything past that? The humble man will be able to say, what I think I know, I might not know. And what I think might not be true, I just need to trust the one who does know, because I don't know. What does God know that causes Job to realize how much he doesn't know? Again, Job had said in Job 13:22, call and I will answer, or let me speak and you reply to me. He said that to God, and God answered out of a whirlwind in Job 38, and God answered out of a whirlwind in Job 40. Friends, we don't have time to continue on with everything else. We'll take some time this evening to say some more about what God has already said here in His Word. Because Genesis will go on to say other things, and God said, and these things would happen. And God says in Job 38, 39, and 40, all of these things. And what does Job respond and say? He responds and says, I don't even know what to say. I don't even know what to say. Poet David knew what to say. Psalm 19, he said, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims His handiwork. Day to day pours out speech. This is God's words. Day to day pours out speech. Night to night reveals knowledge. There's no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. God's words always are heard. He says this, their voice goes out throughout all the earth. God's words to the end of the world, and in them He has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber. Like a strong man, it runs its course with joy, the sun does. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, its circuit to the end of them. There's nothing hidden from His heat. God speaks, and these things just are. And the psalmist David would say at the end of that psalm, that poem, he'll say at the very last of that Psalm 19, let the words of my mouth and the things that I say compare to what God says. Let the meditation of my heart and the things that I think compare to what God thinks. Let those things be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. My rock and my redeemer. Friends, I want you to consider, if you're able to come this evening at 6 o'clock, for us to say a few more things that God says in the creation account in Genesis 1 and in Job 38, 39, and beyond. But let me just ask this question as we finish our moment together right now. What do you think you know? And do you know how much you don't know? And if we don't know, who knows? So when Job says why, he doesn't get an answer. But he does get a who. A who from on heaven, from on high. And God says, I'm with you. Did you notice that God spoke to him? In other words, in all of his suffering, Job was not alone. God was with him. With him. And God spoke to Job in the middle of his difficulty.